So thank you all. And so what I'm going to try and do is to look at how we use the kind of research that we've all talked about in developing a food-based dietary guidelines. And for us, we think it's been a learning journey. At the outset, let me just appreciate the fact that we've been supported by FAO, and so the progress that we have made has been possible because of that, but also because of the commitment of the different stakeholders that we are working with, some of which include some of the presenters who have presented on this platform from Ghana. Just so we put also this in context, Ghana is currently having a population of about 30 million, and about 55% of them are living in urban areas, which resonates with the kind of conversations that we've been having on this platform. And currently we are experiencing not only an increase in diet-related non-communicable disease, but at the same time, we also have unfinished business when it comes to undernutrition. So as illustrated in this graph, the one below here is showing stunting, wasting, and underweight trends in Ghana. Actually, a lot of countries are pointing to Ghana as one of the exemplar countries where we are doing well with stunting. But if you look at the, and this is stunting in children, young children, but if you look at the numbers, it's still like 1 out of 5 children who have stunting. So that's a big deal. And then if you look at other World Health Assembly indicators, anemia among both children and women in reproductive age is higher than the threshold for a severe public health problem. On the other side, when you look at overnutrition among women in reproductive age, the trend has been going on. We've seen this in another format, but we've also seen it in adolescents where overweight rate is going up. We don't have a whole lot of evidence when it comes to adolescents, but the bars in green shows the same nationally representative data that shows between 2008 and 2014, and we see that the rates are going up. We'll also see a similar kind of situation with the elderly, except that in the case of the elderly, we also see that there is both overweight and underweight among the elderly. Just like the adolescent, we also don't have a lot of studies on that. One of the things that have been of interest to us as we try to develop the food-based dietary guidelines is to understand the dietary situation. And Namkolo pointed to some of this, that our breastfeeding rates, especially exclusive breastfeeding, made significant improvements in the 90s. But then coming into the 2000s, it's sort of stagnated. We see the same thing with initiation. And the worst of it, and the one that we probably have the most challenge with, is complementary feeding of young children. This is important because we know that early feeding has an effect on how we eat later on in life. Some of the information regarding our dietary practices have been mentioned when Amos presented earlier on in the day. I think for the work that we have done in the food-based dietary guidelines, and unfortunately I won't be able to have opportunity to go through all the specific details. It's just a summary here of the dietary situation, that while there's increasing food availability, and this is based on food balance sheet data at the national level, household food insecurity remains high, up to about 35% in some places. And then we know that almost half of the household expenditure is on food, leaving very little for other things, which including health. We already know that Ghana is undergoing a nutrition transition, especially in urban areas. And this is characterized by unhealthy dietary practices where there's high exposure to energy-dense foods and low exposure to healthy foods like fruits and vegetables. And all this is being driven by food environment factors. So we know that in the urban areas, there is access to healthy foods, but also unhealthy foods. There's also high exposure to food that is unhealthy through advertising, and also street foods, as well as limited communication of what, what is healthy that people should eat. The school environment also has challenges in some of the studies that we have seen, because there's high exposure to unhealthy food that is also very cheap. And then there are all these informal markets that Reginald referred to, with issues related to food safety, adulteration. And then there are issues about the instability of food price. And then we, in some of the work that we have done with the DFC and tackled also, that has been mentioned earlier, the fact that there is a huge influence of family and friends and the immediate social environment. And some of the papers that have shown these, I have indicated it here, but we can share the details with you. For us, one of the things that was important to look at to be able to develop the food-based dietary guidelines is to look at what is government's response to these problems that I've indicated earlier. And when we look at it, although there are quite a number of governmental initiatives, like there's a national food-based, the national nutrition policy, which targets various subgroups. There are gaps, and some of which I've listed here. I'll just highlight the fact that we have food that is produced in parts of the country that we are not able to distribute to other places. And even when it is moved, because we don't have cold chain storage systems, you lose a lot of the food, and therefore the food prices increase, and then it affects access to healthy food. And one of the gaps that have been identified is the fact that we don't have a national food-based dietary guideline. In fact, when we did the food EP study, one of the key recommendations that came up was the fact that the government should develop and publish food-based dietary guidelines. And note that this was considered a high importance and achievable recommendation. Okay, there's also the recommendation that government should issue guidelines on recommended daily salt guidelines. So all these informed the process of the food-based dietary guidelines process. Now, how have we done this? We are still in the process, but this is a typical cycle of how food-based dietary guidelines have been developed in many countries. We have, at this point, I mean, we've tried following this, and we have at this point established a multi-stakeholder technical task team coming from multiple sectors, and there are 21 individuals in there. There are social, civil society organizations, there's researchers, there's government agencies, from health to agriculture to Ministry of Finance. There's quite a great diversity of that. And this team is led by and convened by the Ministry of Food and Agriculture. And that's very important in the process, because without that, we wouldn't make the progress that we have made. We have also completed a review of local evidence. We've got great support from FAO to carry out this process. So a lot of the work that we have been doing in the DFC and tackled, and now meals for NCDs and other studies that have been done in Ghana, have all been part of the work that are contributing to the evidence review. But it's much more than that, because there is also food production data that we have to take into consideration. There is communication and advertising information that we need to take into consideration. So there were actually, FAO has this wide array of questions, over 100 questions that we try to include in our review. And then we put that alongside international best practices and recommendations. We have recently validated the evidence that we have put together by bringing together all the stakeholders, and then we went through a process of validation. And now, currently, we are going through a process of prioritization so that we'll be able to determine which are the most critical issues that should inform the food-based dietary guidelines that we are developing currently. We still have a long way to go, and I just wanted to point out that once our prioritization is done, the next thing that we want to do is to then define the scope of the food-based dietary guidelines that we want to develop. Preliminarily, we have sort of come to an arrangement that because we already have guidelines for young children, we may not spend a lot of energy looking at children under 2 years. And this is also important because at the global level, there's ongoing processes to come up with global guidance for how to feed young children. So we are sort of adopting a wait and see on that one so that we would then have a more comprehensive guidelines for young children. So this will be for children, this is likely going to be for children who are older than 2 years, but we are yet to make final decisions on that. And then also to look at the extent to which we can include aspects like sustainability, what other non-dietary recommendations that are going to go into that, like water, exercise, or physical activity, and things like that. We also are planning a mini launch. This is very important to get stakeholder buy-in at a very high political level. And this is a process that we are hoping would happen this month in November. And then also along the line, we'll be having modeling, diet modeling, that will also inform quantities of foods that should be part of the recommendations that are given in the guidelines. And then there are other aspects of it that will follow as have been indicated here. The last slide is this one, and just to mention the fact that there are quite some important lessons that we have learned as we have gone through this process. One is that developing food-based dietary guidelines takes a long time. And I'm saying this, I'm going to dwell on this because currently there are only 7 African countries that have published food-based dietary guidelines. I know there are a few who are almost done with this, but I think it will be very important for African countries who are starting on this journey to really think very carefully about how much time it requires and to be able to keep that as part of the timeline of activities that is being done. It also is resource intensive. So at the very outset, it's important to be able to figure out how much will be needed to be able to carry this out. We underestimated this. So we started this process somewhere back in 2016, 2017. And then we were hamstrung. So we had to wait for a while until we got funding from FAO in December of 2019. And then we kickstarted the process again. Another important lesson is the fact that government leadership is absolutely critical. Although the initial push to start this started at the university, we couldn't rally stakeholders like the way government agencies can do. So we really cherish the leadership of the Ministry of Food and Agriculture in this. We've also benefited from technical support from FAO, and that has also been quite helpful in training the critical mass of experts who are involved in this process. Last but not the least, it is really important to spend time, and we have learned this very, very late in the process, to develop stakeholder interest, because everybody has what is their priority, and we need to help them to be able to then figure out how their interests overlap with why you need to develop a food-based dietary guidelines. And altogether, I believe that we are now on track to be able to achieve the process in our food-based dietary guidelines development. So I want to thank all the stakeholders who are involved in it. Some of them are here, and also to FAO who have supported us in this work. Thank you very much for your attention.